Oh. Okay. I'm going to start with the basics. Did you get a handout?
No, I didn't.
No, yeah, I'm not big. Yes, no,
So on the phone though, girl. So I think it's gonna start. There it goes. Yeah, it's not fuzzy. It's like clear after a moment or two.
Are you on the Wi-Fi here? Or are you
Yeah.
using your
I can give.
Oh, I don't know which one is it. It's probably going back and forth.
For what?
For visualizing reality.
That's on Monday?
Yes.
Let's give it.
I will, yeah. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't getting in the way of anything here.
As long as we have a copy.
I guess so. So you just stand up here.
Oh, there's two more left.
You're there,
Right there.
and it's displaying just fine. Yeah, it's only on here that it's fine.
That's so funny.
Can you see me completely on
It's
here?
messing with my mind.
It's buffering right now because I'm on the Wi-Fi.
Because right here I'm a little bit cut out.
Oh, you are? And you're going to be cut out to us too. So.
Turn it a little off.
This won't screen like it was the last time I.
No, because
Because I could project.
no.
I'm used to
It's better
projecting.
than
Can you see?
It's delayed, so.
Okay. This isn't going to be very important.
Oh, it isn't.
I'm going to do one little thing on there.
Yeah, feel free to however you want to frame it. Focus, so.
I'm glad we're starting with he's really accommodating.
Is the podium in the way now?
Podium's not.
No. What's cool is that he can see it. He can see how it's recorded.
Oh, you see it right there?
Does everybody have one of these handouts that says the redesign of AP U.S. history?
Oh, I guess I have one.
Did you want to start?
No, I'm gonna wait one more minute.
Okay.
Because it's 1 minute up.
Okay.
How precise of
You
you.
want her to get over and on camera?
She does not want to be on the phone.
I guess that decides that.
Yeah.
You want to get up there, Cindy?
No. Wow. No.
I'll make a picture of this.
Okay.
Come on, Sid.
This does not have anything on it, so it may be from the remote.
Thank you.
This is the first project.
Yes, it is. I know.
For those of you whom I haven't met yet, I'm Sunny Cicillo, although I know most of the faces in here. Before I introduce Jim, Frank Merritt is passing around a little flyer that I thought he might tell you very briefly what it's about.
Oh.
Briefly speaking, tomorrow night, 6:30,
It gets too dark.
Light Hall. A wonderful opportunity to hear a woman
spelled L-E.
Speak on her experiences in the Congo. You should have one of these or see me afterwards if you don't. It should be a wonderful program.
That was really briefly, wasn't it? Okay, so in February of 2015, an article, a story on NPR started off. The lead sentence was, William Faulkner, and I'm quoting the story, William Faulkner wrote, "The past is never dead. It's not even past. That's the end of the quote. And that's never more true, the story went on to say, when people start arguing over how American history should be taught in school. I've read a little bit over the last couple of years about the controversy about the various versions and revisions of the AP U.S. history curriculum. Excuse me. So when Jim offered to talk to us about that for a lunch and learn, I jumped on the chance. Jim has taught AP U.S. history for 25 years, and he's worked as a consultant in the College Board for 17 years. He was going to provide an objective overview of the controversy surrounding this curriculum, with the insight that he's gleaned from his professional experience, as well as his meeting with members of the Texas State Board of Education, which was one of the boards that was really right in the fray of this particular controversy over the last couple of years. He's going to offer us the answers to the following questions. Will the, did it go away? No? Okay, I can project. I used to be a trainer. Will the College Board redesign the curriculum? Why did the College Board redesign the curriculum? What elements of the redesign have caused so much controversy? And what are the most current developments in the controversy? Is it working again? Yeah. Oh, okay. Jim Smith is a former high school history teacher who's been recognized as New Mexico teacher and finalist. Forget it. I'll project again. I hope yours is better than mine.
We'll find out. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. He now works as an education consultant, writer, publisher, and teacher in lifelong learning programs. As a consultant, he's made presentations and trained teachers throughout the United States, as well as Europe and Asia. He's the author of numerous articles and 3 books, Catherine's Son, Skipper Hall, and Ideas That Shape a Nation, a U.S. history textbook that's been endorsed by numerous teachers and scholars, including 2 Pulitzer Prize-winning historians. In the fall of 2014, he taught a massive open online course, MOOC, for Rice University that trained over 6,700 teachers in 148 nations in the art of teaching history. Jim is no stranger to Will or to Lunch and Learn. He's one of our most popular speakers, and I'm sure many of you came just because Jim's talking today. All of us are in for an informative, engaging hour. I want to just add quickly that this session is being taped and broadcast live, but it's mostly going to be Jim, not you all. So if anyone has questions, though, Jim is willing to entertain the questions as he goes along and or at the end. So thank you, Jim.
I get to be the guinea pig for a technology. You're using the guy who gets to leave town as soon as this is over, right? So, I'm going to state the obvious to begin with, and y'all are going to think, we showed up to hear that. But history is a contentious subject. All you have to do is just watch the news, and I'm entering my 40th year in history education, and sometimes it seems like, well, all of you know about how you're part of a school or an institution, and everything's, you're in a school of 2,500 students, and most of the students are great, most of the teachers are great, and you get one bad apple teacher, one bad apple student, and that's what's all over the newspapers. In 40 years in history education, I can probably count on one hand the times I've had to deal with anything where history was a contentious subject. But that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about what ended up in the newspapers about how history causes so much controversy. Specifically, it's advanced placement U.S. history that's caused so much controversy over the last 2 or 3 years. And if you know nothing about what I'm talking about, hold on, because I'm going to start with the bare basics and explain what AP is to you and what the College Board is and all that sort of stuff. Before we begin, however, I need to give you some backstory. Well, I'd also like to say before I begin that the key word in the introduction there is I want to give you an objective presentation. I am really deeply involved in this controversy. I mean, it's my career. It's what I'm doing since I retired from teaching high school after 30 years, but I've been consulting for the College Board since 1999. I've been an independent contractor consulting for the last 8 years. And this controversy is right at the heart of what I'm doing professionally. And, it's very much part of my life, and I have some really strong opinions about it, which frankly, I don't want to share with you. That's not what I'm up here for. I'm not up here so you can hear what Jim Smith thinks about it. What I really want to do is just tell you the story, tell you what happened, why it happened, and where we are right now. But again, before we get going, part of this story is going to be the Texas State Board of Education, where 2 summers ago, I'm just some guy from New Mexico, and here I am sitting there with the Texas State Board of Education. They wanted to come in and observe an institute I was teaching. One of them was the president of the Board of Education. The other one, there's 15 members on the Board of Education. 2 of them came to visit me. One was the president. The other one was the president-to-be. She's the president now. And they observed me, and I don't know how to explain it except that I got grilled afterwards. And it wasn't anything I was doing. I was representing the College Board, and it was the College Board was on trial, and I just happened to be, the Texas Board of Education said, we want to talk to somebody from the College Board. So Rice University says, well, it's got to be Jim Smith. And I thought, oh, God. Let me go back to New Mexico. So there I was with the Texas State Board of Education. In Texas, every 10 years, they revise their state standards, educational standards, what has to be taught to students. It's called their TEKS. Texas Educational Assessment of Knowledge and Skills. And they have all the testing they have for their students and everything. And so the Texas educational system outlines exactly what it is that is supposed to be taught in the classroom. Well, in 2000, they do this every 10 years. In 2010, the Texas State School Board, there were 10 Republicans and 5 Democrats. And the vote on the new TEKS for U.S. history was 10-5, right down party lines. But bottom line, this caused a lot of controversy, and it ends up pulling me in more ways than me having to meet with them. It also gave me some consulting work where I got paid. That was nice with Prentice Hall. I'll tell you about that in a second. But bottom line, what the Texas State Board of Education wanted in the TEKS for U.S. history, and I can't go through all of it, but I'll just give you some examples right here. You can get online and look up your TEKS and read pages and pages and pages of what's in there. But bottom line, they wanted to make sure that the Texas state standards, the TEKS, established how biblical law was a major influence in America's founding. So what they did is they listed, it says, the students must identify the individuals whose principles of laws and government institutions informed the American founding documents, including those of Moses. So basically they're putting Moses as one of our founders in the Texas state standards. They also wanted to make sure that, how did they word this? That it was in the Texas state standards that Joseph McCarthy's attacks on Americans were justified. In the section on the influence of art, music, and literature on American society, they wanted hip hop removed from the Texas standards and replaced with country music. They do not want the word slave trade used in Texas classrooms. Instead, they want it called the Atlantic Triangular Trade. Also, they took the word capitalism out of the Texas state standards and replaced it with free enterprise system. They thought that capitalism had some bad connotations. In fact, here's a quote from Terry Leo, one of the board members. She said, let's face it, capitalism has a negative connotation, capitalist pig. So they replaced that with free enterprise. The one that caused a lot of controversy is they were listing the influences on the revolutionary movements of the late 1700s, and they had the Enlightenment and Thomas Jefferson removed from the Texas state standards. And they had added Thomas Aquinas and John Calvin instead. They also wanted to make sure that it was clear in the Texas state standards that the Civil War was caused by states' rights and not by slavery, and that slavery should only be mentioned as a side issue. So that's the Texas State Board of Education. That got me some work with Prentice Hall because the book publishers were in a heck of a situation. Texas is the textbook market in the country. You know, if you don't sell your books in Texas, you don't make any money. So you have to sell to the Texas market. Kind of, you got to sell to the Texas market and the California market. So textbooks that meet the Texas state standards that'll sell in Texas won't sell in California. I mean, a lot of the stuff I just listed, that's not going to sell in California textbooks. But what they want in the California textbooks about slavery being the cause of the war and having Thomas Jefferson and the Enlightenment in the textbooks, that's not going to sell in Texas. So basically, Prentice Hall hired me as a consultant to ask me, what do we do about that? They paid me several $100s to tell them that they should just have two textbooks, one with a red cover and one with a blue cover. I mean, that's about the only way that I could see to really, to settle this issue. So let's get into one more thing to know as a background issue here. Back in 1991, under President Bush the first, the Department of Education decided to create some national standards for Common Core subjects, and these were voluntary. But they wanted to say all over the United States, anybody who has geography, what should they be learning? And the subjects they listed were math, science, English, geography, and U.S. history. We want to create national standards for those. They created some national standards for history. It was a committee of college professors and teachers and everything. And it hit the United States Senate, and the vote was 99-1 to reject them. And actually, it was 99-1 to denounce them. And the one guy who voted against it thought that the denunciation wasn't strong enough. My point is, having national standards in history is almost impossible, because the history you teach in Alabama is going to be a lot different than the history you teach in Massachusetts. And we learned that back in the 1990s. So let's pull the College Board and the other controversy in all of this. Some general information to get you started here. The College Board is a not-for-profit organization that was created in the year 1900. They've been around almost since Moses. It's kind of complicated, but basically their mission is to connect high school students to college. They measure their success by increasing the number of students who go to college and increasing the number of students who actually graduate from college. It's the College Board that creates the SAT exam and the Advanced Placement Program, which I'm cutting a lot of stuff out here, but we want to get right to the point and get to what matters. Okay, the Advanced Placement Program was created in 1955 by the College Board. Okay, this was part of their way of connecting more students to college. And an advanced placement class, by definition, means that a student is taking a college-level class while they are in high school. It doesn't mean college prep. It's an actual college-level class. So if you're taking AP Physics, you're taking what a college physics student would be taking while you're still in high school. There's a national exam, and I've forgotten the number. I mean, there's 34, 35 AP subjects right now. And I mean, they have studio art and art history and music theory and Latin and Spanish and German and, U.S. history, world history, and, almost any subject you can think of. Well, if a student is, there's a national exam in all of the subjects in the first 2 weeks of May. If you pass that exam, you can get your college credit for that subject before you go to college. They grade the AP exams on a 5-point scale. The College Board says 3 is considered passing. But that doesn't mean that a college will give you credit, because it's up to each university what they do. My students in Mayfield High School in Las Cruces, If they went to if they, out of 5 points, if they made a 3 and they went to New Mexico State, they would get their full 6 credits for history. And they would never, that's the requirement for any graduates. So that's, they'd never have to take history again, you know, once they're out of Mayfield High School. If you went to UNM, the requirement was 4 before they give you any credit. I mean, you go someplace like Harvard or Stanford, they want at least a 5. Some schools, like the service academies, West Point, the Air Force Academy, they don't give you any credit for AP scores. But what gets you in West Point is that you took AP classes. Okay, AP, let me explain to you that this is a really important part of the story here. I'm going to talk about for the next half hour. A real important part of the story is you have to understand that the exam that the College Board gives, the AP exam for each subject, it has to have a lot of credibility. Harvard and Stanford have to say that's a good enough test that if the kid passes it, we give them credit for that subject at our school. So, I mean, everybody understands that, right? That this test has a lot of credibility. I will tell you that it's an extremely difficult test. It's not for everybody. If there's, 200 people graduating from Silver City High School, I would theoretically like to think everybody should be an AP student, but realistically, if Silver City has 10, 15 kids pass the AP exam, that's first rate. It's a really difficult test. It's an important program to have in high schools, to have good AP classes for the students who want to go to Harvard and Stanford. I mean, what gets you into schools like that is that you have AP on your transcripts. So bottom line here, the AP exam is written by college professors, AP teachers, and it has to maintain its credibility. Here's the problem with it. If the Texas Board of Education attacks the AP exam and wants it changed to meet their requirements, what will Stanford and Harvard professors say about their testing those things I just mentioned earlier? It's not going to cut it. So the controversy is really over, I mean, it's pretty deeply embedded in the American academic culture, what's getting ready to happen with AP U.S. history. My experience here is I've taught AP U.S. history for 25 years before I retired. I have been a consultant for the College Board since 1999. That means a lot of things, but primarily it means that I train AP U.S. history teachers. I train them in how to teach AP U.S. history. I was doing a week-long summer institute at Rice University 2 summers ago when this thing exploded. And I'm going in as a representative of the College Board to explain to the Texas Board of Education what's happening with the redesign of AP U.S. history. Okay, then the last thing right here, the redesign of AP U.S. history. AP U.S. history has been around since the 1950s. It's really the only national standards we have in U.S. history, but it's not from the Department of Education. It's from the College Board, a private organization, right? Or a nonprofit organization. So you can see how there can be a national standard if it's not in the realm of politics. It's from the College Board. It's put together by college professors. It's what students do to show that they're worthy of college credit. Universities all around the United States. They decided back in the early 2000s to redesign AP U.S. history. It's the first significant redesign of U.S. history since the 1950s. And it ought to make a lot of sense that about every 50 years, you ought to rethink how you're teaching something and redesign it. Well, there's 2 redesigns. They put together a committee in the year 2006 to start the redesign. Boy, was it contentious. Okay, and I'll get to this in a minute. It wasn't contentious over content, it was contentious over how we teach the class. What ends up in the newspapers wasn't even what was causing the controversy to the people who were redesigning the curriculum. But it took them 9 years to finally submit the new curriculum framework. I mean, David Kennedy from Stanford University was on it. They had AP U.S. history teachers. I gave them feedback. I knew the people on the committee. Other college professors are on the committee. After 9 years, they finally redesigned it. So they submit the new redesigned curriculum to begin being taught in 2014. It was the summer of 2014. I was training tons of teachers in the new curriculum. And that's when it hit the fan. Within 9 months, they redesigned the redesign. Within less than a year, they had to back off and say, we're going to redo this. And to make a long story short, there were states all over the United States that were going to not allow AP U.S. history to be taught in their state. That's why I was meeting with the Texas Board of Education, because they were saying we're going to not allow AP U.S. history taught in our state. And that was causing a lot of problems for parents. What if your child is somebody who's willing to go to Stanford or Harvard? You want that school to have AP classes. And now the Texas State Board of Education said, we're not going to have it in this state. And it was causing controversy and protests and everything out of this world. In 9 months, they redesigned the redesign. And that's what I want to talk about. Before I get going, any questions or comments so far?
Well,
Go ahead, Ted.
Well, I was just gonna ask, how did this affect the prep schools?
Prep schools have AP classes, just like public schools do.
It is based on state requirements.
Nope, prep schools don't have to do state requirements, but the AP exam has nothing to do with the state of New Mexico. AP is a College Board thing, and I mean, it's totally separate from anything that the state of New Mexico is doing in education. The only thing that the state of New Mexico would have to do with it is the state of New Mexico would say AP is a good thing, we want more students involved in it, let's give more funding to it in our schools. And the redesign was causing schools to back out of funding, states to back out of funding. Yes,
well,
ma'am.
that was basically the same thing as across the board for private as well as
Yes.
public.
The AP exam is the AP exam. It doesn't matter whether you're in a public school, private school. It has nothing to do with the grading of schools or teacher value. I mean, some schools might use it, but it's totally separate from all this other testing stuff we hear about all the time. This has been around since the 1950s, and it's just really advanced level history. Any other questions? Yeah.
Did anybody with the College Board consider just ignoring Texas and letting them?
I'll tell you more about Texas in a minute, what happened with them. In fact, I'm going to tell you this whole story in a minute, what happened with them. But you really can't just ignore it. When a state says we're not going to fund AP classes in our state, the College Board has to listen to that. Let's hold on to the story here.
They could just send them Donald Trump.
You've got a lot of kids sitting there. In fact, one of probably the biggest event that happened in the news was a protest of students in Jefferson County in Colorado. That was the most newsworthy event because the local school board there was not going to allow, they were going to require what was taught in the AP classes, and what hit the streets was the students saying, stay out of our AP classes. That's not what we want to learn. Well, passing the AP exam. You got to teach students to think analytically and historically. I'm going to make this very, very quick and simple. Thinking, I don't like the expression, and I never use this in any of my teacher trainings. You don't teach kids to think critically. Bad teachers misuse that. You teach kids to think analytically, which means that it's an academic thing. You reach conclusions based on the evidence available to you. You take academic questions. For example, you don't ask kids whether or not labor unions are good. You ask kids whether or not labor unions in the late 1800s were successful at improving the lives of workers. Whether you like labor unions or not, that's an academic historical question. And you would say, well, according to the evidence available to me, labor unions did not improve the lives of workers in the late 1800s. Now, in analytical thinking, there's an open-mindedness built into that based on here's my conclusion based on the evidence available to me. What does that imply? My conclusion is open to being changed. different evidence, different ways of looking at evidence, I'm going to change my conclusion. So what you do to pass the AP exam is you have to be taught to think analytically. You're not taught that labor unions are good or bad. You're just asked academic questions about whether or not they were successful. And then according to the evidence available to you, you reach a conclusion that they were not successful, but you understand that there might be other evidence out there that you haven't seen and you're open to hearing that evidence. You teach students to think historically. This is long and complicated, and if we had more time, I could talk. I literally do week-long institutes on this. But historians think differently than mathematicians. You know, for example, history doesn't have chapters. We just kind of morph from one thing into another. But you know, the history books will tell you 1400, the Renaissance started. You know, so what happened? All of a sudden, 1,400 people woke up and we're living in the Renaissance. You know? Historians compartmentalize things. They put things in historical periods. They compare and contrast things. They compare and contrast the Reconstruction of the 1860s with the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s, or they compare and contrast Jeffersonian democracy with all of that is academic stuff. And you teach students to do that in a history class. You know, you teach them to synthesize information, to create historical time periods, to create historical arguments, etc. Bottom line, to do well in the AP exam, you have to be able to think at the highest levels. You also have to be able to write well. Part of the redesign, the old exam, 50% of the exam was written. There were 3 essays on it. With the redesign, this is one of the things they wanted to change. They wanted writing to be more important. The new exam is now 60% written, 40% multiple choice. One of the contentious things that happened over that 9 years was whether or not 100% of the exam should be written. They decided to still have 40% multiple choice, but none of the multiple choice are recall questions. They're all thought questions, where you have some document to read and then you have 4 or 5 questions based on that document. And with the questions, each of the choices are right, but only one is right for that question. It's tough, right? But bottom line, 60% of this exam is written. Kids have to be able to write argumentative essays at the highest levels. They have to be able to write argumentative essays at a level high enough that Stanford will say, that kid doesn't have to take our history classes. I'm going to keep coming back to that this test has to have a lot of credibility. The third thing to pass the AP exam is you have to know a significant amount of history. There's the controversy. Let me tell you from a teacher's point of view, you know what I'm thinking about? How do I teach kids to think and how do I teach them to write? There's this 3-legged stool. They have to be able to think, write, and know. Well, how do I teach them to think? How do I teach them to write? That is really hard. As far as the actual content, here was the problem with the old AP exam and the reason they redesigned it. In the multiple choice section, they could literally ask anything that has ever happened in United States history. So here's what ends up happening to AP history teachers. Half of the test is multiple choice, half is written. And over the years, if you teach it long enough, I'm not making this up, you see questions about the Armory Art Show of 1913, you see questions about Jelly Roll Morton. One year they even had a question about All in the Family. You know, so you're sitting there thinking, good God, a question about All in the Family, what am I supposed to cover? Well, what's the answer? Everything. Well, in my trainings, I used to always tell teachers to ignore step 3. Teach them enough history. And the trick to the AP exam is not to know answers, but to be able to figure them out. What I just said is profound. They pay me really good money to tell a lot of teachers that. The trick to the AP exam is not to know answers to questions, but to be able to figure out answers. So the trick to teaching a good AP class is you're teaching kids to think and to write. The old AP exam, the curriculum that used to be in a little 6x9 book, and they had about 4 pages of the actual content you're supposed to teach. And it would say something like causes and results of the Civil War. Okay. You know, you didn't know what to teach. The new redesigned curriculum is 64 pages and it spells out in a lot more detail. This is one of the few times I would ever say this, but more is less. Y'all understand that concept? That if you have 4 pages of what you're supposed to teach in U.S. history, you end up thinking you got to teach everything. But if you have 60 pages spelling it out more specifically, then you're saying, okay, now I know what I got to cover. But here was some, let me speed this up just a little bit here. There's 2 approaches to teaching history. This is the old-fashioned approach. I bet some of you had this teacher. It's the ball and string approach, where you think of history as a string of information, and the semester starts and you start unraveling all that information, and the semester's over. Usually what happens is every teacher gets behind, so the closer they get to the end of the semester, faster they're unraveling the string of information. I used to always joke, it's not really a joke, but the dark ages of American history are 1960 to the present. Kids will know more about the War of 1812 and the explorers of the 1600s than they know about Vietnam or Watergate or Reaganomics. And it's because history teachers never get there. The problem was teachers were taking the ball and string approach. So I am doing these workshops for years telling teachers don't do that. And they're saying that they can ask anything and I'm behind. Well, what ends up happening is when you feel like I've only got a month left, I'm only on 1900, you quit doing thinking and writing assignments because you got to cover everything. Do y'all understand the dilemma? That is why they redesigned AP U.S. history. Because they wanted it to quit being a ball of string class and they wanted to turn it into a class where teachers took the post-hole approach. The post-hole approach of teaching history is that you think of history as a series of topics that you explore in depth. Now, what I mean by exploring a topic in depth is that you do a lot of reading on that topic and a lot of writing about that topic. And writing and thinking are the same thing. So instead of just unraveling a ball of information, you take a topic, you explore it in depth, you do a lot of reading and writing on it. That's why they redesigned AP U.S. history. Is they wanted to encourage the development of thinking and writing skills, which the good AP teachers were doing that already. But no matter how, there's some people that no matter how often you tell them, they just never get it. And I would train teachers till I'm blue in the face. That's the trick right there. But what they wanted to do is to redesign the curriculum where the ball and string approach was not feasible, that you had to take the post-hole approach. They also wanted to encourage a greater depth of study within a small number of topics. So guess what the committee spent all its time on? Coming up with the definition of historical thinking, coming up with good rubrics for writing, all that stuff. As far as the concept outline, here's what they decided to do. Okay, they come up with this new curriculum framework with the thinking and the writing skills in it. Part of the new redesigned curriculum framework is what they call a concept outline, where they're going to list 60 pages of concepts that students should know. This is the minimum that you need to know about U.S. history. And here's how this is what caused the controversy, is this concept outline. In fact, tell you what, before I move on there, this is why you have the handouts. If you'll look at down at the bottom of page 1, this is how the concept outline works. There's required information. Look at number 5, the concept outline. Time period 4, 1800 to 1848. Here's some required information. Supreme Court decisions sought to assert federal power over state laws and the primacy of the judiciary in determining the meaning of the Constitution. Does that sound pretty general? Every kid taking an AP class has to learn that concept. How does a teacher teach it? However they want. It's obviously talking about John Marshall. Okay, if I wanted to talk about how he became Chief Justice by being a midnight judge, I could. I could talk about Marbury versus Madison, McCulloch versus Maryland, Gibbons versus Ogden. There's a whole bunch of other cases I could talk about. In other words, example 1, what is in italics is required. Optional information depends on what state you're living in and what their state standards are. Does that make sense to you? The concept is supposed to be so general that every state gets to make their standards fit that concept. The state of New Mexico doesn't say we have to teach Givens versus Ogden. Okay, I won't. My state says I have to teach McCulloch versus Maryland. Well, that's what I'll teach. If I live in a state where I have a lot of flexibility, I'll teach the court cases I want to teach them. But the thing is I'm going to teach something that illustrates that concept. Okay, let's go down to example 2. The competition for land in the West among white settlers, Indians, and Mexican Americans led to an increase in violent conflict. That is really general, right? If I live in El Paso, I'm going to teach about the Salt War. If I live in New Mexico, I'm going to teach about the Lincoln County War. If I'm living in Montana, in other words, you got all this flexibility for local history. It really doesn't matter whether I teach Lincoln County War or the Great Sioux War. It doesn't matter. Whichever one of those two I teach, what am I illustrating? That concept. And I can explore that concept in depth according to my materials, my state standards, etc. College Board is pretty proud of it. We came up with 64 pages of just real general concepts. And then it hit the fan. You know what was causing the controversy? Not the writing rubrics, not the thinking skills, the concept outline. Whenever the College Board said we can ask anything that ever happened, there was no controversy. But when the College Board starts listing concepts like that, it caused controversy. In other words, as a teacher, you're thinking about getting kids to think and write. What is it that people in the political arena are thinking about? What are they telling them about Washington? What are they telling them about the cause of the war? That becomes the controversy. Several states threatened to defund the teaching of AP history. Let me tell you what Texas did. I'm sitting there at the Texas School Board, and they're going on and on. In fact, just a minute, I'm going to tell you exactly some of the things that they were worried about. I ended up saying, why don't you just use your TEAS as the optional information to support those concepts? That was in July. In September, that's what the Texas Board of Education decided to do. That they're going to require that their teachers use their TEAS as the optional information to support concepts. And I thought that's the way it was designed to begin with. That's what Texas did. When Texas voted for that in September, I thought, well, that'll end it. It didn't. Oklahoma just went ape. They were not going to allow AP U.S. history to be taught in their state. Kansas got into it. Several southern states were going to abolish AP history. It caused student protests in Jefferson County in Colorado. It wasn't going to go away. The College Board is sitting on top of a redesigned curriculum that is going to lead to the defunding of AP in a lot of states. Okay, let me, general criticisms of the framework. It didn't foster patriotism. When they read through it, they thought it's not curating kids who are patriotic. They also thought it ignored American exceptionalism. Now let's get more specific. Well, here's some quotes here. This is from an Oklahoma representative. It emphasizes what is bad about America, the nation of oppressors and exploiters. The Republican National Committee. Now, this isn't just some state representative. This is what the Republican National Committee said. That's what the College Board is up against. Now, to get more specific about it, where's my document? Let me give you firsthand information here. I mean, I could go through it all and say, well, they objected to this, objected to this. I sat with 2 members of the Texas Board of Education, and I will tell you exactly some things they were saying to me. Let me also say they were very nice, very polite, very sweet. They were also feeling a lot of pressure from their constituents. And they were quizzing me about what about this, etc. Turn to page 2. Number 8, some specific criticisms. This is Jim Smith meeting with the Texas Board of Education. When I say specific, this is not out of the newspapers. Okay, these are 3 examples of me sitting there with them. They objected to leaving George Washington out of the curriculum. He wasn't mentioned. Why did you not put George Washington in the curriculum? And here's what I did. I pointed out what was in the concept outline. Okay, read along with me. After experiencing the limitations of the Articles of Confederation, American political leaders wrote a new constitution based on the principles of federalism and separation of powers, crafted a Bill of Rights, and continued their debates about the proper balance between liberty and order. Okay, see where it says American political leaders? Here's what I said to the president of the Texas Board of Education. I don't know how you teach that concept without mentioning George Washington. But they're concerned that Washington's name wasn't in there. And so really what I was trying to do was explain to them the concept of a concept outline. You know, that George Washington is in there. Okay, letter B, they objected to a sample essay question for presenting a negative view of American Revolution. Here's the sample essay question. Some historians have argued that the American Revolution was not revolutionary in nature. Support, modify, or refute this interpretation. Let me tell you that in U.S. history classes, that's an argument that goes back to Moses. Was the American Revolution a true revolution if the people who were in power after the revolution were the rich white guys who were in power before the revolution? You see what I'm saying? In other words, here's the academic question. Was the American Revolution a revolution or a war of independence? It's just brain candy. You know, it's not meant to put down what happened at all. It's just kind of the sort of thing that you sit around, you know, in college and talk about like it's serious. You know, but they objected to that because they thought it presented a negative view of the American Revolution. Then they also, let me show you this here. They objected to this political cartoon as a sample question. They were real upset by this. Let me show you, make that bigger. Yeah, blow this up a little. There you go. That's about as big as I can get it. Here are some, I won't say fat capitalists, I'll say fat-free enterprisers. The Golds, the Vanderbilts, etc. And they're sitting on the backs of the workers here. The lumber workers, the linen workers, etc., etc. That's a cartoon from the late 1800s. And that was presented as a sample of a cartoon that could be on the AP exam. They thought, look at this, that it doesn't portray American exceptionalism, that it portrays American capitalists as bad, etc. Here's what I did. I pointed out the questions that went with that cartoon. Okay. This is the short answer section of the AP exam. Briefly explain the point of view about the economy expressed by the artist. In other words, it's not about whether capitalism is good or bad. Why is it on the exam? It tests your thinking skills. What is this artist's point of view? And then the second part of the question, explain one development from 1865 to 1910 that could be used to support that point of view. So tell one thing that happened that might make the artist say that. And then the third part, explain one development that could be used to challenge that point of view. Excuse me. The entire question wasn't about whether capitalism was good or bad, it was about whether or not you can analyze documents. So in short, that's what my meeting with the Texas Board of Education went like. Anyway, number 9, they redesigned the redesign. I don't think I need to go back to the PowerPoint. Let me see here. I'll go ahead and put it up there. Here's what they end up doing. They put key historical individuals and documents specifically in the concept outline. In fact, let's look, if you'll look at page, go to page 3. See where it says 2014? That was the redesign. 2015 is the redesign of the redesign because of the controversy. Look at what it says, sample C, page 3. 2014. Despite considerable loyalist opposition, as well as Great Britain's apparently overwhelming military financial advantages, the Patriot cause succeeded because, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now look at how they changed it. Despite considerable loyalist opposition, the Patriot cause succeeded because of the actions of colonial militias and the Continental Army, George Washington's military leadership. I bet you would have been teaching that anyway. Look at the 2014 version. How in the world do you teach that concept without talking about George Washington's military leadership? But now they've put it in there. Look at sample D. As the first national administrations began to govern under the Constitution, continued debates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now look at 2015. What are you seeing? George Washington, John Adams. Look at the next page. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton. So they, you know, the people who were on the committee who were redesigning the redesign, I asked them, you know, what are you going to do? And the guy that I know that's on the committee said, we're going to scrub the language. What I've given you there is specific examples of how they just kind of scrubbed the language. I don't think they really changed anything except just kind of scrub it. The second thing they did, some events such as the American Revolution and World War II were given greater emphasis. If you look at like on page 4, sample G, look at the second item under 2015, sample G. The United States and its allies achieved military victory through allied cooperation, technological and scientific advances, the contributions of servicemen and women in campaigns, such as Pacific Island hopping and the D-Day invasion. There it is. You add phrases like that, and you're pacifying the controversy. So you put a little bit more emphasis on things like the American Revolution and World War II. Also, they put American exceptionalism into the 7 themes. There's 7 themes that run through U.S. history. There's politics, economics, culture. One of the themes was American identity. All they did was they added the phrase American exceptionalism as part of our national identity, which would mean you would support that by talking about the Puritans believing in the city upon a hill, or you would talk about Lincoln saying we're the last best hope on earth. You know, that's American exceptionalism. You see it peppered in the language of FDR, etc.
Or you would talk about manifest destiny.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Huh?
Yeah. Well, oh, you know, that brings you up to one thing. I don't know if I'm answering your question. The Texas Board of Education had the word imperialism taken out of their standards. It became expansionism. Manifest destiny still in there.
Well, we're still doing it.
Well. So all's well that's all's well that ends well, right? Guess what happened? This redesign of the redesign came out last August for this school year, and the controversy is gone. Look at what the Wall Street Journal said. Great conservatives, you won. And they're talking about the redesign of AP U.S. history. Here's what the National Review said. Last week, the College Board released its revised framework, and to our pleasant surprise, it's not just better, it's flat out good. This is a conservative educational think tank, the Thomas B. Ford Institute. So the failings and blemishes of our past are still there as they should be, but they're no longer the means for. My editorial comment. Okay, I mean, I got really strong opinions about a whole lot of this, and I've tried to just tell you the story. You probably know where I stand a lot of it, but I've tried to be as objective as I can be. But here's my editorial comment. It was much ado about nothing. I gave you what you have listed here. 2014 was the one that was causing the controversy. 2015 is how they change it. I listed some of the more profound changes. When you read through it, you'll probably think there's not much to it. You know, it's sort of, I don't know how to say it except that we live at a time where everything is an issue. And there was a lot of protest and a lot of grief and everything, and they scrubbed the language and they add a few names to it. You know, they put American exceptionalism in there. You know what? They couldn't change it too much. Why? Because the top universities will then say, we're not accepting that. I mean, they had to leave it pretty much as it was. They just kind of scrubbed the language and it ended up being okay, which I'm really grateful for. The controversy's over. From a teacher's point of view, I have a really good friend, one of my closest friends. He's a heart surgeon, and he literally just retired last week. It's probably about 68, 69, although this is his third retirement, so we'll see how long it lasts. But I was on the phone with him 2 nights ago, and he was talking about the importance of teachers and everything. He said one of the best teachers he ever had was his high school history teacher. And he said he doesn't remember anything about history that he taught him. He says, what that guy gave me was the ability to think and write that lasted me my entire career.
Wow.
And I'll tell you from a teacher's point of view, if they want me to teach Marbury versus Madison, I will. If they want me to teach McCulloch versus Maryland, that's what I'll teach. You know, if they want me to teach the Salt Wars rather than Lincoln County War, I'll do that. But it's the thinking and the writing skills where you can really, I mean, how far is it going to take you in life to know about the Elizario Salt Wars? Are there people who live perfectly fulfilled, happy lives and know nothing about that? How far does it take you when you don't know how to think and write at the highest levels? How far does it take you academically? I thank you all, and I'll welcome any questions. Does anybody have any questions?
It seems to me like history ought to be revised much more frequently than every 50 years.
After what just happened, it may be another 100 years. I agree with you.
But with current events, you know, create a need for the population to have some knowledge, that, historical knowledge, that is just so often
That's the
absent.
third part of the school, to know their history, but that's the part that causes so much controversy.
Well, it's more than that, though. It's to think about how you got to where you are today, and
Oh, yeah.
how you could.
Well, I agree with you 100%, but what caused the controversy here wasn't thinking and writing skills. It was the specifics of what they learned about George Washington.
But the thing that strikes me the most today is we're confronting the rise of Islam. 99% of American people know nothing about it.
Steve?
If the goal ultimately is to teach skills of thinking and writing, and the actual content doesn't matter so much.
That, you know,
It can be done equally well with conservative versions and
Yeah.
They can both teach those thinking and writing.
well, you know, the College Board is looking at, not only is this a national thing, I mean, I've trained teachers in Europe and in Asia. I mean, this is international. So they were trying to create concepts that were so general that it really didn't matter whether you're liberal or conservative or whether you live in Alabama or Massachusetts, that you can teach those concepts and use whatever your optional information is to support it. That's how the College Board saw it. Some people saw it as not patriotic and denying American exceptionalism.
But isn't it true that either version is equally good at teaching those general skills?
Yes,
So
Yeah.
what's the difference?
that was kind of my thing. I mean, it's kind of much ado about nothing. Do you have a question?
Well, I was just reflecting back on my time in school in Texas. And my recollection was that we never got past 1900 in any of the history classes that I ever took.
Sounds about right.
But it wasn't because they ran out of time, although they did run out of time. It was because they were afraid to teach anything after 1900 because those were political issues and somebody might connect to what's going on
I have
today.
heard that several
And
times.
they really, I mean, this was pretty clear to me, and I talked to some of the teachers. There was pressure on them. So it was not just that they, that they were letting the string out and they got caught at the end. They were fearful, And I suspect that that's part of the.
I had a colleague who once told me he doesn't teach anything after 1960 because he didn't think he could teach kids to love their country and teach anything after 1960.
Don't tell the school board.
But the thing is with the AP exam,
You have to go back to 1846.
you know, it has nothing to do with the teacher. If you're a student in my AP exam, I feel a real heavy responsibility to you that when you sit down with that exam, that you have a shot at it. And I've got to cover it all. And I've got to develop those skills in you.
I think I predated
Oh,
the AP. I didn't have that particular problem, but I do think people were afraid. And I think, looking at some of the examples that you've got here, part of the issues that people were apparently trying to address with provisions was to sort of separate history from current kind of controversy. So, for example, when we talk about in the little item about progressive reformers, we've got the change says, the first statement says progressive reformers did X. In the change, it said, in the progressive era, in the early 20th century, progressive reformers did X. Well, I mean, that's a way of saying, well, we don't have any of those progressive reformers around now.
Yeah.
But back then, that's what they did.
You know what?
Because if we talk
The
about-
critics wanted the word progressive taken out completely.
Well, of course,
But
and liberalism is also.
But what ended up happening is they couldn't do that because that's what they called themselves. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt was head of the Progressive Party in 1912.
We all know this in the room.
But it was, we need to, we're saying wrap it up here. So, listen, thank you all. If you have any other questions or comments, I'll possibly.
Well, I have to say that if I had had history the way this was outlined, I would have enjoyed it. You know, when I was in school, it was what happened on what day and memorize it and spit it back. And I hated history and I slept through most of the classes when I wasn't writing notes to my neighbor. Next week on Wednesday is our next Lunch and Learn. It's Firewise Community, what it is, how to create one. We have one Firewise community